All right, hello and welcome everyone. My name is Tu Luscre. I'm the Assistant Vice Provost for Innovation and Entrepreneurship and the Managing Director of the Skandalaris Center, Washington University's university-wide hub for startup engagement and support. Our center supports students, faculty, staff, and alumni at any stage of their entrepreneurial journey and provides opportunities and resources to go from idea to launch and beyond. Please reach out to me or our team anytime if you have an idea and need help, or if you can help those who have ideas. We're going to open today's program by wishing everyone a happy Juneteenth. If you're here in St. Louis this week, please join University Libraries in partnership with the Department of African and African American Studies, along with the WashU Slavery Project, for a special Juneteenth celebration that will occur on June 23rd. Additionally, I invite you to view last year's recorded virtual event, which was hosted by WashU's Brown School, entitled When Freedom is Fully Achieved. This features a fantastic panel of faculty and alumni. Links for both the events are going to be shared in the chat here, so you can take a look at those. Very excited to welcome all of you to this virtual conversation with four incredible WashU alumni to hear more about their companies and the way they're changing the way we live and work for the better. I'd like to give you an overview of the function of the program today, how everything's going to work for the format. Your screen is going to feature these alumni, and you're welcome at any time to submit a question through the Q&A function. This event is being recorded. We're also going to share this on the Alumni Association's YouTube channel following the event, so you'll have access to this in perpetuity there. I'd like to now introduce Mitzi Krockover. Mitzi Krockover, MD, is a partner at SBS Solutions, a healthcare management consulting firm. She's also managing director of Golden Seeds, which is an angel investment organization dedicated to funding early-stage companies led by women. Her work in women's health includes serving as the former founding medical director of the Iris Cantor UCLA Women's Health Center and former VP of Women's Health at Humana. Most recently, Crockover founded Women Centered LLC and launched the Beyond the Paper Gown podcast, both of which aim to inform, inspire, and engage women so that they can achieve optimal health. She serves on the boards of the Institute for Mental Health Research and the Black Women's Health Imperative. At WashU, Crockover is a member of the Institute for Public Health National Council and the Phoenix Regional Cabinet. Mitzi?
Thanks so much, too. We truly appreciate having you a part of this event. And it's now my pleasure to introduce our three WashU alumni panelists. Dwana Franklin-Davis is the CEO of the Reboot Representation Tech Coalition. She leads the coalition's pooled philanthropic investments, which enable Black, Latina, and Native American women to earn computing degrees and lessens the diversity gap in tech. A lifelong technologist with a passion for increasing diversity, equity, and inclusion in the tech sector, Franklin-Davis joined Reboot Representation in 2019 after working in IT, software engineering, and leadership positions for MasterCard, May department store companies, and IBM. Based in New York City, Dwana holds a bachelor's in management from Purdue University and a master's in information management from WashU. Next, we have Shelley Marmet. In 1979, recognizing the need for lactation consulting to become a new, 1977, I should say, recognizing the need for lactation consulting to become a new allied health profession, she co-founded the Lactation Institute and Breastfeeding Clinic in Los Angeles. She currently serves as the clinic's director. She's received numerous awards and sat on numerous boards, including the World Alliance for Breastfeeding Action. Today, the lactation consultant profession includes more than 33,000 IBLCE board-certified individuals around the globe. The profession has Shelley and her clinic co-founder to thank for initiating its tremendous growth. And last but certainly not least, we have Holly Rockweiler. Holly is co-founder and CEO of Madorra, a women's health company dedicated to changing the treatment paradigm for vaginal dryness. She co-founded Madorra as a spin-out of the Stanford Biodesign Innovation Fellowship. Prior to completing the fellowship program, she worked as a senior research scientist at Boston Scientific, where she developed therapies to enable more efficient care for patients living with heart failure. Her work has led to 16 pending and issued patents, and she earned her bachelor's and master's degree in biomedical engineering from WashU. So thank you all for being a part of this event. I'm so excited to get a chance to have a conversation with all of you. So we're going to dive right into the questions. You know, it's interesting that each of us has pursued very different degrees, but all of us have committed time, resources, talent, and skill to work that helps women, whether it be enhancing their job opportunities, caring for their family, or taking care of their own health. You know, my own journey started when I had this kind of subtle aha moment. I was newly hired at UCLA, and I was asked by my new clinic supervisor what specialty area I wanted to focus on in the practice. And I literally heard myself say women's health without even thinking about it. And again, this was in the time when women's health was not really two words that went together very well, at least in the paradigm, and Shelley's laughing. So again, like it has as now. So I'm interested in learning from each of you. If your focus on helping women was the plan all along, or what moved you to the on-ramp of that lane. And Dwana, I'm going to start with you because you shared previously that your work chose you, and I'm wondering if it's similar to how it chose me.
My work definitely did chose me, and it was not always my mission to focus on women first. I'm a technologist, and although, as you read in my bio, I have a management degree from Purdue, I went to Purdue originally for computer science. And spent all of my career and my journey in tech. But with that, there's also the obvious observation that as I looked around throughout my entire pathway and journey, that I was one of few women and one of few people of color. So it's always been something that I wanted to make sure that I was able to influence or help increase. And so I was always mentoring or speaking or helping to start BRGs, business resource groups, as we call them at MasterCard. And so as I got to vice president levels at MasterCard and was thinking about what was next for me, the opportunity came to be the CEO of Reboot. And as I read the job description, I felt like it was written for me. It was the perfect opportunity for me to take a step out of the tech industry for a moment and be able to do something that I'm extremely passionate about, which is focusing on increasing representation of women of color in the tech ecosystem.
Thank you. I got chills when you just said that. So thank you for sharing that. Holly, how about you? When you wanted to become a biomedical engineer, was women's health part of that journey?
No, not at all. I like how Dwana, you said it chose you and Mitzi as well. I feel really lucky. I do feel like I fell into it, but it's a perfect connection of a lot of personal passions, and I didn't even know that at the time. So when I majored in biomedical engineering, I mean, I wanted to work in health technology, but that's all I knew. And then when I went to Stanford and went through the biodesign fellowship program, it's an educational program that's very hands-on, and you look for problems to solve to learn the process. And we had all kinds of different problems. We had, what became Madorra, but we also had something in men's sexual health, something in infectious disease. And, slowly through the program, I found myself gravitating towards Madorra, but not really recognizing why. And I think it took like 3 or 4 years after starting the company to really recognize, like, oh, I love working in women's health. This probably was the way it was going to be all along. So I wish I could say I was smart enough to have known that about myself, but I learned it on this journey.
Well, and can you take just a moment and explain what Madorra and what the device is that you are manufacturing or creating?
Yeah, so we're developing a new technology that'll be a home use medical device to treat vaginal atrophy and dryness for postmenopausal women. And so it's a condition I'd never even heard of before I joined this program at Stanford. And it's a problem that affects 50 to 70% of all postmenopausal women when the vaginal tissue becomes thin and dry. And it's, happens to a lot of people. It's been happening since women have lived longer than menopause. So there are treatments available, like over-the-counter lubricants and hormone replacement therapy, which is the gold standard treatment. But what we uncovered was that a lot of women were unserved by those options. Even though hormones are what's recommended for the majority of women, only 7% of the market's using it. So we understood this big unmet need for something that could treat the symptoms, but that didn't use hormones. And so that was kind of where we started, and then started trying to develop the technology. So we are still pre-market. We're working through our FDA process, but we're developing an ultrasound-based solution that women can use in their home that would naturally kind of bring back the body's mechanisms that it already uses to lubricate the vaginal canal. So you wouldn't have to use exogenous hormones or chemicals to achieve the same benefit.
Great. And just full disclosure that you and I met because as an angel investor, especially in the women's health space, that's how I met you, and then connected with you via WashU. So, and I am an investor. So again, full disclosure. And Shelley, you know, I'm listening to Holly's, you know, trajectory, and she's, you know, getting into an area of sexual health, which is still somewhat of a taboo, but is hopefully gaining some traction. But when you started, especially even around breastfeeding, that was also, you know, a new frontier. So please tell us how you got into that. Mute. You're on mute.
Okay, I am not technological.
It's okay.
I am a problem solver. I see something that needs to be fixed and I want to fix it. I want to jump in and help and make things easier for other people. It's just my nature. I've always been drawn to women's issues, although probably not quite for the same reasons that a lot of other people have. I was always told as a kid, I could do anything I wanted, and it wasn't whether male or female, which may have been unusual in my era. And full disclosure, I'm 78. I'm older than the other folks. And I started breastfeeding my kids, and I ran into problems, and there was nobody to help me, literally nobody. I was born and raised in St. Louis. I'm 6th generation St. Louisan. And there was nobody else who was breastfeeding when I breastfed my first in the entire city that I knew. And I knew, my husband says, I knew everybody. I didn't, but it sometimes felt like that. In any case, there was literally nobody. And my husband's a physician, and he knew nothing. He got nothing in his education. Most of my parents' friends were physicians. Our friends were mostly physicians because he was. Nobody knew anything. And so I had to problem solve. And within a few months of starting to breastfeed my first, people started calling me from all over the country. I understand your long-term breastfeeding. I had been breastfeeding for 3 months. Ridiculous. But it was so rare in that era. And so I would say to them, if they lived within a few hours drive, come, let me see what's going on. Maybe I can figure something out. There was nobody to refer them to. And it really grew from there. But I was attracted to working in sexuality also. And there was a period of my life where I thought my husband and I would be sexual counselors. Interesting enough.
Yes.
But I do want to add that what I started when I had the idea in my head in 1977 that the way that I could help fix breastfeeding problems was to create a new allied health profession and a new allied health professional. And everybody thought I was crazy because it didn't exist anywhere in the world. So it was, to say it was challenging would be a real understatement.
Well, I tell you, I give you a lot of credit, and you've made a difference in so many lives. You know, I'm also impressed by the fact that at least 2 of you have pivoted from your original path, as we talked a little bit about, to different roles that perhaps were unexpected and required other skills. And so, Dwana, I'm going to pick on you again. You moved from large corporate environments to becoming the CEO of a nonprofit. And what surprised you the most during that transition? And I'm also interested in knowing what skill sets that you brought from the corporate world to the nonprofit world that served you the best.
I'll start with the skill sets because I think that's the easier question. I think, you know, corporate world prepared me for being able to create strategies and lead global teams and being able to build roadmaps and relationships and all of those things that you learn in corporate America, finance and budgets, et cetera. And so all of that was very transferable to my nonprofit space. And then also because of what I focus on, our mission at Reboot is as we have tech companies or companies in the tech space who join our coalition. So I'm managing those relationships. We work with other nonprofit leaders in higher ed institutions. So managing those relationships. The experience that I have as a woman in tech, as well as in corporate America, lent very well to that. What I wasn't prepared for was how slow the nonprofit and higher education space moved as compared to corporate America. I'm in tech, so I'm used to things moving fast, things being due yesterday or hurry up and wait. And when I would reach out to someone and say, I want to fund you, and they're like, we'll get back to you in 3 months. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I said I want to give you money, and you said get 3 months. And so that was a huge adjustment. I'm big on data. And Reboot is also very big on data. We're all about metrics and numbers and disaggregating and collecting all of the data. And that is not something that is familiar in the space that I'm in right now. So I'm and both with corporate partners as well. So I'm educating and training those that I work with on what it means to collect and disaggregate data and how that helps us build the foundation of our programs and initiatives. I also thought that my mission would be something that every person or every company would be in alignment with. I mean, who's not going to want to increase representation of women of color in tech? And so I was handed this soft list of friendly leads that said, yes, we'd probably be interested in joining the coalition after there's a CEO on board. And I reached out to them and I'm like, oh, I'm about to sign up a good 15, 20 companies. And they were like, who are you? And what are you doing? And why are we doing this? No, we're good. So it was kind of like a shock for me on how to work through the relationship and partnership aspect, because in my head, the mission is kind of a no-brainer, but how we work through budgets and how companies work through what their real and intentional objectives are is something that is still interesting, fun, and challenging.
You know, I had a question for later on, but I'm going to ask you this now. And it's, again, I think for many of us, it's going to seem obvious, but having been, again, immersed in angel investing focused on women-led companies and the dearth of investment dollars that go. Yet there's a lot of numbers that say women-led companies are more successful and so forth. So I'm going to ask you, when you go to those folks that say, what's your argument for why diversity matters? It's not, we're not talking charity here.
I don't, 2 years post the murder of George Floyd, I don't know why we have to still explain why diversity matters. But for the sake of the audience, I think that there's all the data that has been out there for years. And again, I already said I'm a data person, that talks through the fact that diverse teams are a better return on your investment. They produce better products. They produce more innovations. To use an example, a common sense example, to me, a common sense example that I think many people can relate to, in the middle of the pandemic, when they're like, we need people to get back to work. And in New York City, they were getting ready to send people back to work, but the kids weren't back in school. It was a very obvious, there's no women over there making decisions or someone that has family, because how can you send the people back to work, especially the working moms, if the kids are still at home? So
Sure.
Diversity of teams allows that extra thought that that will help people with their blinders. So I think we're still getting there with regards to the intentions. And so it's very interesting to see we're post statements where, today's the federal celebration of Juneteenth.
Exactly.
And so the question is, for those companies, regardless of what field, how are we intentionally working on building equity, as well as making sure that we're serving everybody in the community that we are consuming?
How is that argument facts settled? Have you made headway?
Yeah, I think that, you know, we have amazing partners that are part of the coalition. So for those that don't know how our coalition works, tech companies join at various tiered levels. We are a 501c3. We're funded from Pivotal Ventures. And so all the money that comes from our corporate partners, we then regrant to nonprofits that are in alignment with our very specific narrow mission. And so what gives me hope and inspiration are my partners. They have shown and are proving that they are trying to get better and that they're real and that they're intentional and that they want their corporate cultures to reflect the societies that they serve. And so when the students ask me, Dwana, where should I work? Who's going to value me from my whole self? And what corporate culture is going to be one that I can work at when we're talking about tech companies? I always say, let's start with the reboot companies because I work with them on a regular basis and I know that they're not perfect, but they are most certainly trying to get there.
Yeah, it seems to me we have a lot of maybe recent grads as well as students listening. And I think what you just said is really key in terms of when they're looking at, when anyone's looking for a position in a company to know what their values are and the opportunities. And then going back to the pivoting, I'm going to pivot back to the pivoting. Holly, you know, you pivoted from being a biomedical engineer to an entrepreneur. What was that like? And, you know, what skill sets translated for you?
Yeah, great question. So I think I would call myself, well, I would have in the past called myself a reluctant entrepreneur. Like I related to what you said, Shelley, about problem solving. It's like, okay, well, someone needs to make this technology. I've got a background in clinical research. I can do it. And I guess there's more stuff that needs doing, so I can do that too. So it was really just a roll up your sleeves kind of attitude. And so from the skill set of being an engineer, you know, at Madorra, one of the values we have, it relates to what you were saying, Dwana, in a slightly different way, but it's being very data driven about everything we do. It's something that we saw as lacking from a lot of technology being brought forward in the women's health space. Some of it great, some of it snake oil, and we wanted to really differentiate ourselves by saying, no, we're going to do this kind of the right way from the start. And really do that because that's what women deserve, and they're very savvy consumers, and that's what they want. And so having a background in biomedical engineering, obviously I'm a data person, and the problem-solving nature of being an engineer too. I think those are really key connections. I also find that, you know, for the stage of the company we are right now, we're in R&D. I can really communicate really easily cross-functionally with our clinical team, with our engineering team. I don't always know, you know, what type of resistor or diode they're talking about, but I've heard those words and I can understand, you know, the components and global supply chain. So I think it's really helped me. Also, I think my WashU education, frankly, of being, I feel like a lot of our biomedical education was really kind of learning to be a Renaissance engineer. And that's helped me to build a really strong team. Like, I know a little bit about this thing. I'm going to hire someone who's a super expert in this thing that I can build a strong team with. So I guess, yeah, that's what I would say. It didn't feel like a super pivot because it's been a long journey, but it feels very natural.
Terrific. You know, Shelley, you shared with us about your journey in terms of how you got into what you were doing. And, you know, it's interesting, again, however many years, I can't do the math because that wasn't my forte, but in any case, 40 plus years, perhaps, you know, we've now gone from, you know, in trying to encourage folks to breastfeed. It's been I think a slog in some ways for a lot of the reasons that you just said. I can tell you personally, I didn't have somebody to help me. And so I didn't breastfeed as long as I wanted to because I didn't have anybody advising me, and it was frustrating, you know, but now we're hearing, you know, there's a formula shortage, and perhaps that may be a boon to your business to a certain extent. But, you know, so again, fast forward 40 years later, what kinds of challenges are you currently facing that you were still facing before? And perhaps are there any new ones?
I think we've got a long way to go, even though a large percentage of, a sizable, not large, a sizable percentage of people initiate breastfeeding in the hospital. It's a much smaller percentage, and even in hospital, directly after their babies are born. that exclusively breastfeed in hospital. And by the time the baby's home and a week old or a month old or 3 months old, that just drops off profoundly. So yes, we have more people breastfeeding still exclusively at 6 months, which is the American Academy of Pediatric recommendation for exclusive breastfeeding. It's not their recommendation that people breastfeed, women breastfeed for 6 months. It's their recommendation that they exclusively breastfeed for 6 months. And we're far from achieving the kinds of goals that we should. And unfortunately, the United States then influences the rest of the world. The way we go, the rest of the world tends to follow in terms of things like this. So we've got a lot of work to do still.
Yeah, you know, when I was at Humana, one of the things that we were able to implement was an employee lactation program. And have you been able to work with employers, for example, or has that been a barrier for women who are going back to work, for example?
Of course, it's a barrier. And yes, not so much me personally, but people in the field, people who I inspired to become lactation consultants in part, did go on to create business programs and show with research how important it was for businesses to back women up and have a breastfeeding room and some equipment available, et cetera. But I think we have to get even more to physicians. I think we have to get much, much, much more support for women to have their babies at workplaces so that they can breastfeed during breaks. There are places that have had centers where the babies can be put in a nursery, in a company, and they do brilliantly. Why we don't follow through with that across the board, I don't understand. You cannot breastfeed without the mother and the baby being together. It's that simple. Yes, I have worked long with pumping. I did the initial research for how breast pumps, electric breast pumps, should be used. I wrote the instructions that went in the kit of every breast pump that got rented and the kit got purchased. My name was there. And that was based on my research. And now, because it's so ubiquitous, the use of breast pumps, they don't include that anymore. And I don't think people are using breast pumps as well as they used to. So you find mothers saying, well, I don't have enough milk. In order to make enough milk, you got to take the milk out of the mother's body. It's that simple. Supply and demand. And getting that into people's heads is like pulling teeth.
How do you find what seems to be a stigma against breastfeeding in public, for example? Again, it's kind of a loaded question, but I would assume that also challenges the kinds of things that you're trying to do.
The breasts are still looked at as a sexual object if they're bared. It doesn't matter if everything is open except the nipple. That's okay. That's just sexual, but it's not a negative. Women can wear gowns and the breasts can be shown, but expose that nipple and all hell breaks loose.
You know, and as we're talking about this, Holly, again, you're having to deal with stigma as well, I would assume, again, from, everything from being able to advertise when you're finally, approved and on the market. But how has that even impacted, for example, your fundraising?
Yeah, you can't raise money for Madorra without saying the word vagina to a bunch of men. So it's a journey. I think thankfully, I think people have really evolved and it has changed a lot. Like, I think we started the company 8 years ago, and just even in the last 3 or 4 years, like the number of people talking about this issue has really changed, thanks to things like the internet, obviously, and the media. And then I just saw an article, I think it was in Vogue a couple of weeks ago, of like menopause being the final taboo to smash in women's health. Because it's like not only women's health, but aging women, which nobody seemed to want to talk about. And it's like, this is a real fact of life, folks. So I think, personally, I guess my background in biomedical engineering and being really data driven, it's just like, I could talk about vaginal dryness just the same way I can talk about heart failure. It's just a condition and it needs solving. So you don't need to be uncomfortable. I'm not uncomfortable. People who have it are uncomfortable. We need to change that. So I think just plowing forward is the method. But you're right. I mean, we have friend companies in women's health that are on the market and really struggle to tell their story because of what's censored and what's, you know, Shelley, I really was laughing at what you said because it's amazing how true that is. Like, so for instance, and I think this is still true, you can't say the word vagina on Facebook without being, you know, totally cut off and told you're a sex toy. And that's, you know, that's really shaming and also difficult for women to get the information they fundamentally need to start figuring out how to talk about this. So I do think it's changing. And I think thanks to who, you know, society, frankly, people saying this is not okay and standing up to talk about it. So it just takes, you know, I take the approach of just like, it's not gonna happen fast, but if we all start feeling more comfortable about it, start talking about it, it will eventually, that tide will eventually change. And Shelley, you're an inspiration, frankly, to see what, I mean, I had multiple lactation consultants helping me when I had my kid 2 years ago. So things do change, thankfully.
Call me.
It's interesting also, it dawns on me as you're speaking that I would hope that having more women in the decision-making process, whether it be, again, you all developing these solutions and these products and these opportunities, and also the people that are going to fund you, whether they be in, corporate America, in leadership positions or in VC funding and all of that. So, I hope that, because again, we see a lot of things about erectile dysfunction, that seem to have hit the market. My kids, I think, knew what ED was before they knew what a vagina was. So in any case, I'll move on. So in any case, Dwana, as you pointed out, today is June 20th, which is the national holiday celebrating Juneteenth. We've made some progress, but as you also pointed out, we have far to go. And again, we've got all disparities with respect to women's health, but even in healthcare in general, we have racial disparities, both with equity, access, and even health, health in general. And we have a lot of bias as well. And my sense is that we don't have, I think that's not just my sense, but we don't have adequate representation that could potentially mitigate these disparities. And as you've pointed out, there continue to be gaps in representation in tech. So what are these other barriers, in addition to some of the things that we've just been talking about, to getting more women of color into tech? And also, what are the opportunities you're seeing and making?
Yeah, so I just first have to say to Shelley and Holly, both of them are amazing women, and
Yes.
we all need to thank them for their contributions. But I think this conversation and many conversations like it are a start, right? To be able to normalize things that are not considered to be normal. And so whether we're talking about being able to say breast or vagina, or seeing women, and even more specifically, women of color in places where we're not used to seeing them, let's start to normalize it so it's not so taboo. Visible representation goes a very long ways. And so we have some work to do before we can get women, and specifically women of color, to those high achieving places where little girls can look up and be like, oh, I want to do that. That's a normal job for me. That's a career that I can do. So being able to be visible and to talk and say this is the things that we're doing, and then also being able to have mentors and sponsors, and not over mentor, but also make sure we bring the sponsors along that journey so that we can usher amazing women through to the places that they desire to be. Making sure that we are able to, like with Reboot, we're investing in a very specific portion of the pipeline. And one of my sayings is, let's connect all of the dots of all of these amazing programs so that it creates a true pathway for whatever pipeline that we're choosing to be on. Because right now there's a lot of disparate programs, and you're like, yay, my fourth grader took this STEM program. Now what? What does the fourth grade girl do after that? What is the next thing that continues to foster her love and her interest in math and science? And that has to continue throughout the whole pipeline. Otherwise, we're never going to see women and women of color in technology fields and in other STEM areas.
Thank you. And again, to connect those dots as well, as I'm looking at Holly and I'm thinking about academia as well, those are very similar things that we're seeing in tech and STEM fields, as you pointed out, no matter, if we're talking about corporate or academic or professions like medicine. Okay, a little bit of a shift. I want to get one more question before we go to Q&A, because we've got some other questions that are much more important from the audience. But I know that one of the most impactful experiences of my education at WashU was how to learn to think critically. Before I came to WashU, I had only taken multiple choice tests, to be real honest with you. And my first essay test was at WashU. And I also learned how to question the status quo. And I think that is something I use daily when looking at, all the factors that impact on women's health beyond the medical conditions, for example. My daughter is a WashU alum, and as an anthropology major, she took a course that actually showed her how to use her skills as a consultant. So we thought maybe she'd go an academic path, but now she is a user experience researcher and a very successful one at that. So I am grateful. I'm wondering if there was one moment, person, or course that likewise played a significant role in your professional path during your education. And Shelley, I'll start with you.
One moment. The moment that I conceptualized the lactation consultant profession in 1977 was a culmination of many, many moments. Breastfeeding my own kids, having specific unusual problems and having to get through them because nobody knew what they were doing, working with lots and lots and lots of mothers. As a lactation consultant before the term existed, going into hospitals and in-servicing the nurses and the docs, and seeing when I was invited back in successive years to the same hospital, I was affecting no change, zero, zilch. It was like batting my head against a wall. And I knew that I had to come up with a solution that would fix the problem so that we could help mothers and babies. And I have to say, when I made a decision, it always boiled down to what's best for the baby, not even what's best for the mother, because nobody was the baby's advocate. And I recognized that that was the key. If it was good for the baby, it was going to be good for the mother in general, and it was going to be good for the family, and it was going to be good for society. And then I would say that I had to figure out, once I had this aha moment, that we needed lactation consultants. And I saw immediately that they needed to be master's degree, at least educated, and that there needed to be formal education and formal coursework. And how do you do it? My husband's famous line when I went home and told him what I conceptualized was, who would pay? Who would pay for lactation care? So that was my big moment, I think. And it didn't come specifically from WashU, but WashU's education for me was specific. I went through Central Institute for the Deaf, CID, but that part of WashU is where my degree is. So I worked with the hearing impaired community. And I had to learn a lot about oral anatomy and function. How do we get the oral anatomy of a deaf human being to work so that we can get function, as in speech? And that played a big role. Another piece of what I really gleaned from WashU and my education there was they had a class. My class was a combination of undergrad and grad. And the only difference was one course that the graduate students took where they read journal articles and discussed them. That was it. Everything else was identical. So that my undergraduate degree was really equivalent to a graduate degree. And when I started to create my own degree program, not mine, but a degree program, both both bachelor's and master's, to train people in this field. That kind of education, how it could work seamlessly, was really integral to what I was able to create.
Terrific, thank you. Holly, you're shaking your head. Are you having a similar thought?
Oh, no, I just, I think
Resonating?
it's really maybe similar in the fact that I cannot point to one thing at all. I think of kind of a patchwork quilt that led me here that will continue to guide me, thanks to, I mean, something you said, Dwana, also made me think, like, from a young age, I was good at math. And so everyone told me to be an engineer, and I had no idea what an engineer was, but I was like, I guess I could be an engineer. But like, that's not encouragement women got. And so I'm really grateful for them. Like, my mom always told me that she was really good at math and no one encouraged her to pursue it. And so she said, the same's not happening for you. And so, you know, my sister's a PhD in computational biology, and here I am. So it really paid off, but it wasn't just her, right? It was the whole system. And so I can't think of one thing. It just feels like everything led me here. So I was just nodding to, it sounded like something similar, Shelley, you were saying. It was like different aspects all plugged in to create what you were able to create.
Thank you. And Dwana, how about yourself?
I mean, just like Holly just said, it's never just one thing that gets anybody to the destination where they land. And for all of us, well, I'll speak for myself, this isn't probably my final destination, and there's still more that I'm learning that will lend to the next. But if I specifically think about WashU, and so I got my master's there, and so it was a different stage of my career journey at that time. It was a different type of critical thinking that I was able to apply. I had already been working for several years and had some corporate experience under my belt. So was able to really enjoy my classes instead of just trying to get through them, and really be able to think about how I would apply different aspects into the workplace, because I always had a passion for tech. So if I would shout out or call out Dr. Tom Brody, because he was critical and amazing on that journey for me in that space. I will always remember, he said, Dwana, we have to have a short presentation, not the long presentation, but then do like a 5-minute version of that. And so I always planned every presentation that way, and I've had to use it the short version several times. So
Yeah.
That will always stay with me.
Great, thank you. All right, well, we're gonna move over and hopefully have some time to answer many of the questions that our audience has. So I'll go ahead and just start. And I'm not sure, maybe this is to Holly. If you think you have a good idea for starting a business led by women for women, where do you start, and how do you go about raising the investment that is needed?
Well, it's a great question. For us, we started by talking to women. So if you think you have a great idea, you probably have already talked to a lot of women, but I would say keep doing it and make sure that, you know, this is something that will translate. I think if you want to raise investment, that's a whole nother factor. You know, it may be a very great idea, but it may or may not be a good fit for raising money. And so to think about that, you have to think about what, so this is silly, but investors invest because they want to get a return on that investment. So you need to think about that. It's not that they're just funding it because it should exist. Although some investors maybe do that, you know, ultimately have to have a return. So that's something to start thinking about too. And then I would say plan ahead and start fundraising long before you're fundraising. And so you're going to learn a lot in that process too, by trying to ask people for money. Or this famous saying goes, and it does not exactly apply to me, but it's a famous saying that if you ask for money, you'll get advice. If you ask for advice, you'll get money. I haven't got that second part down yet. But the first parts happen plenty. So it's also fine to just say, I'm not raising money. I don't think I'm ready, but can I, you know, just talk to you about, here's the milestones I'm thinking of funding. What do you think of those? Are those the appropriate inflection points? And really, I guess, long answer, short answer is just keep talking to people and it'll start coming together more.
Sure.
And I think talk to two. He said that at the beginning. If you have
That's
ideas,
right,
you
exactly.
him.
Exactly. We have a great entrepreneurship program. And I would just say, as an investor, you know, and seeing a lot of decks and talking to a lot of entrepreneurs, what you said is exactly right. You know, no matter what the thesis is, whether it's to support women-led companies or diverse leadership or whatever it is, at the end of the day, an investor wants to get some kind of return. And so the way that you show that is not only by showing what you're doing, but who the market is, who's your competition, why are you better? And so for the individual, perhaps I'm looking at that. There's a lot of resources online about just even how to do a deck that has those very key questions that are going to be asked. And I would say start answering those questions earlier rather than later, or having them in your mind so that you can start answering them. Does anyone else want to add to that question, or should I go on? Okay, so how can men be allies for each of you? And Shelley, sounds like your husband was an ally from the very beginning. Yeah, and any other thoughts on that?
But I also corralled lots of physicians that I knew throughout the country. Wherever I could tap, I tapped. And I do want to say, for something like what I was creating, which is a service for women, it's very hard to talk financial investment. It's very hard to get investment money when you don't have a product. What you're doing is helping women and helping breastfeeding, but formula companies make zillions of dollars, and they have zillions of dollars for advertising. Who promotes women being able to breastfeed and produce breast milk? Nobody, except the breastfeeding world. And by the way, I don't use the term nursing because these are not nursers. These are breasts, and we need to take breasts out of the closet in order to promote breastfeeding. Nurses are people who work in hospitals. Here is right. So I do want to address that issue, is that when you don't have a product, it's hard to talk hard money. But I worked with men throughout the world by educating them, by pulling them into what I was doing so that they would understand why there was a need for lactation consultants, because we faced walls with just about every other profession. The nutritionist said, no, breastfeeding belongs to us. The nurses said, oh no, the breastfeeding belongs to us. The doctor said, nobody else is going to do this except us, but nobody was doing anything. The speech pathology world said, oh, this belongs to us because it's the oral anatomy. The physical therapists, everybody said, no, we don't need lactation consultants, as they realized that we were there competing. We weren't competing, but they saw it as competition. And so I had to woo people, if I can use that old word, wherever I went. And when I really didn't differentiate between educating, wooing men versus women. We had to educate them all.
Great, thank you.
I made the men allies. Where the men came in that was most difficult was at the very beginning. What do I do if a man wants to become a lactation consultant? That was an issue.
And
I made the command decision after great thought that everybody would be welcome, whether they'd had babies, whether they'd breastfed babies, whether they were male, female. And it never crossed my mind to differentiate between people of different ethnicities or races, or that never even crossed my mind. But women who had never breastfed crossed my mind. And certainly what do I do with men? If I've got a man in the class, how do I get women to come in and teach?
sure.
You can't teach anything about breastfeeding without lactating breasts, live ones.
Well, we have male physicians, so makes a lot of sense.
And that was a piece of my decision making. But what do you do if it's not somebody who's a physician?
Right.
I had engineers who came to study with me, for example. No MDs. I did have MDs, but I had people who were engineers without an MD degree. So what do you do with them? Do you accept them?
You did.
I did.
That's great. Dwana, likewise, I'm sure this is an issue that comes up for you all the time about making men allies.
Yeah,
Allyship.
I just wanted to add, because Shelley said so many amazing things. So allyship starts with empathy and being able to be open-minded and willing to learn what someone else is going through. And that could be through your own research first, and then being able to ask the hard questions after you've done your own research, and then having that open mind and heart to be able to support those that you are trying to say you're an allyship with. What people cannot do is walk around and pointing themselves as allies. That's for somebody else to say that you're an ally. So I just want to add that piece.
Thank you.
Can I add in there?
Of course.
It's so important to realize that when you're an innovator, you have to work with other people. And the more people that you can pull in and make allies, exactly what you're saying, Dwana, the better, the more likely you are to achieve your goals. You don't do things like this in isolation. Creators have to work with other people.
Perfectly said.
Innovators.
So we have time, I believe, for one more question before I ask my closing question. And I'll just read this. It's a little lengthy, but I want to make sure I get it right. I love the idea of an organization valuing you for your whole self. As a new mom, congratulations, I feel like I have to split myself. Even if I'm working from home, there's conflict to feeling like I have to sacrifice something, either time with my baby or my focus at work. How do we marry these two together so that women don't have to feel like this? What is a good way to engage potential business partners without having a previous relationship? And how did you determine your business partnerships would be a good long-term match before signing contracts? So there's a lot to unpack there. So let's start with the first one. And I think it's something that that COVID has, it didn't create, but it certainly highlighted. And that is this real pull between professional and personal responsibilities, with a lot of both falling on women. Holly, do you want to try that one first?
Yeah, I think it's a perennial question for a good reason. I think what's nice too is that I think maybe COVID helped us realize that it's not only women. I mean, women certainly have taken a stronger brunt of it, but like we all have real lives. And so I don't have a good answer, but I can say that, at our company, one of the values that we together created was that you can bring your whole self to work. We literally use those words, and we avoided the term work-life balance because everything I do at home affects how I come to work, and everything I do at work affects how I come to my home. So I'm in my home right now, like they're inextricably linked. And so I don't know what the answer is, but I think, Dwana, to kind of piggyback off what you were saying, it starts with empathy. Like, my team knows I have a toddler, and when daycare is closed, like it is today, they know that, well, I'm going to be spotty and they'll hear from me when I can. And I think that empathy piece is really critical. So I think trying to pretend like people don't have these other demands, and if you don't have kids, you've got all kinds of other demands on your life. Everyone does. And so I think, I don't know, just speaking about it and being open about it. And I think that's the place to start. Again, I don't have the answer, but that's what makes me think of.
And can I just piggyback off of what you just said to ask a specific question of Dwana, because you're working with corporations who are trying to include more representation. And with that, especially with women, as we were talking about, there needs to be an understanding of a lot of these issues that we just talked about. How are they creating those opportunities, or is it still, do you still see that as an uphill battle?
Especially in the tech space, it's evolving and rapidly. I mean, we saw over the last 8 months, people we're going back to work. We're not going back to work. Everybody must be in the office 5 days a week. Just kidding, not really happening. So I think we're still in a place where that's not settled yet, and it's still changing. But I'm excited to see that they're willing to try and see what that means and what that looks like. There's no one size fits all. It's going to depend on the nature of the work. There's some work that has to be done in person. I can't imagine, Shelley, you not doing your work in person, as an example. So there's some work that has to be done in person, and some that doesn't make sense where you can be anywhere. And so companies are thinking realistically about what that means and what that looks like. I think that women, I always will say, let's just be honest with yourself and what you can achieve and what you want to do. And as part of you bringing your full self to your workplace environment, that's also you setting boundaries. And so for those that are not in leadership, I say it's okay to start training your boss on how you want to be treated. Don't answer emails in the middle of the night, because when you do that, then you're telling them that you're available in the middle of the night. So just being able to have real conversations about, this is what I want to do for work and what's acceptable to me. And then if you find yourself in a position that is not comfortable for you and it's not conducive to the way that you want to work, first I say have a conversation. And then if it's still not going to work, then there are a lot of jobs right now. So move to an environment where you can be comfortable and bring your full self to work.
Great, thank you. I know we didn't get to everybody's question. I do apologize. We have about 2 minutes left, so I'm going to ask this question as a lightning round, but of all of our guests, and that is, or all of our panelists, I should say. And I'll start with you, Shelley. What was the best advice you were given or would give to someone in the audience who is thinking, I want to do what she's doing?
Get yourself thoroughly trained. And that doesn't just mean taking a short course or even an extensive course. That means make sure that you're used to working with the newborn and also the 3-year-old who's still breastfeeding. Make sure that you're steeped in many, many different kinds of issues and problems. Also, be prepared to work collegially, that's a hard word to say, collegially with multitudes of people, different organizations. As a change maker, you have to convince people that what you want to create is important and worth their time. So be thoroughly educated and be prepared to work with lots of people. Be prepared also to be in the frying pan. By that, I mean, it's going to be sizzling at times.
Thank you. Holly?
Yeah, that's great. I think, what I needed to hear, so that's what I'll say, is like, just start. Like, you might have a lot of your own mental baggage telling you why you can't do something, but most of that is wrong. And you will learn what you need to do along the way. It's definitely a sizzling frying pan. I love that. I feel that right now. But we always say this in entrepreneurship, high highs and low lows. So riding those high highs is incredible and helps keep it worth it.
Great, thank you. And Dwana, your advice.
Yes, to build on this, I think I would say that leverage your professional and your personal lived experience, because they're going to lend to everything that you do in your future, as well as the fact that what Shelley said with regards to being educated and being prepared, but also ask all of the questions. Don't be afraid to ask questions, and don't be afraid to hear the word no. My grandmother used to say, no never hurt nobody. So don't be afraid of no, because just move on to the next.
Terrific. Well, thank you all so much. This has been a lot of fun, and I've learned a lot. So thank you. And now I'm going to pass this on to Tu, I believe.
Great. Thank you very, very much, Mitzi, and all of the wonderful panelists. This was incredible. I learned so much and just inspired hearing everything that you had to say and learning from these experiences. And we're very excited to support and help develop more ideas and things in this space and beyond. So please, as I mentioned in the very beginning of this, do reach out if there's any way that WashU or the Skandalaris Center can help anyone attending today. And I do want to especially thank all of you who took the time to attend today. Many things that you could be doing this afternoon, but you spending time with us really means a lot, and I appreciate you joining us for today's important event. Please do stay tuned for upcoming events that are sponsored by the WashU Alumni Association, as well as the Skandalaris Center. And with that, we'll close off. Have a great rest of the day.
All right, thank you.